Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and tonight I am here just to help you relax, to drift off to sleep by the sound of the waves, like the whispers of old souls. I know you have come to this video not just to hear the story, but also to find a deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, please gently like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to tell you strange stories under the dim moonlight. Where are you from? And what time is it where you live? Just relax. Let your body relax. Put all your worries down by your pillow. Let me take you into a world of mysteries where the wind and the waves mingle, and unsolved mysteries are waiting to be told. Are you ready? The captives. I have been a prisoner in this camp for more than 1 year. Many of us have died, mostly at the hands of our captors, but some from disease and trauma. Somehow I have survived, but it hasn't been easy. They beat us mercilessly today with leather straps. At least 4 men surrounded us and whipped us. They yelled at us, "Move, you stinking beasts!" They made us run into a wooden structure, then locked us in. I was afraid they would light the structure on fire with us locked inside. But whipping is not the worst. One of the men used a red-hot iron on one of us. I will never forget the screams of agony from that poor chap. It left him with horrible burns. He died soon after. I would estimate there are about 100 of us in this part of the camp. There is a big turnover, with new inmates showing up daily. About every 5 days, about 10 inmates disappear, and 10 new ones are brought in. We are given very simple food to eat, usually either a slurry of corn or a bucket of fetid mush. The captors often walk back and forth, laughing at us as we try to eat. Most of the time, we have to squeeze our heads through the bars on our cells in order to get to the food. The beatings and torture are bad, but there is something worse. Several female inmates came into the camp pregnant. When they gave birth, the men in charge immediately took the little one away, not even giving the mother a chance to see or bond with it. I can't think of anything more cruel. A few days ago, they came into our barracks and grabbed 4 unfortunate inmates. They used handheld electrified clubs and drove these 4 chaps out and into a separate building. We heard them screaming, but soon after that, there were 4 loud thuds, and then there was silence. One of our informants claims he witnessed the goings-on in there. He said he saw our compatriots hanging upside down by their legs, with their throats slit from one ear to the other. When word of this spread through the camp, there was a palpable wave of horror and panic. Detailing all the brutality and torture we have experienced seems like wasted energy. No one listens to us. There doesn't seem to be any end to this existence or hope for the future. Many of the inmates show signs of depression and severe anxiety. One inmate had been very quiet, but suddenly threw himself against the electrified fence, dying right there. The captors left him standing in his death, leaning against the fence with the full current flowing through his body, his legs twitching and spasming. We suspected that leaving him there was a message to us, not to disobey or try to escape, or that same type of destiny awaited us. Yesterday morning, a very important man visited the camp. We knew he was important because of the way he was dressed. Most of the workers in the camp wear casual clothes or military-style tactical outfits. This fellow was decked out in a 3-piece suit and had a leather overcoat slung loosely about his shoulders. He carried some type of cane or stick. A rumor spread quietly amongst the gathered that this man might be the one they call the Angel of Death. He had us line up for inspection. Any inmates not accurately in line met with an electrified club, ensuring obedience. While we were at attention, he strolled up and down the row, pointing his cane at a few of the inmates he favored. His assistant wrote down the chosen inmate's number, and once he left, those selected were taken away and led into the back of a large truck, never to be seen again. I sometimes stand quietly outside the barracks, and I can see life way off in the distance. There is a park not far from here. One can see people walking their dogs, picnicking or bicycling happily. I can even hear the laughter of children as they run through the park with their parents chasing after them. How beautiful, I think, would it be to stroll in a park, saunter down to a babbling brook up in the hills, or eat peacefully without the fear of violence. I know it's just a matter of a brief time until my life comes to an end. I've lived this nightmare existence longer than I expected. When I first arrived, other inmates told me I probably wouldn't last a month. But I have seen many come and go, to a fate unknown. It would be all too easy to give up all hope. But when all seems lost, one still has the right to dream. That is something they can never take away from us. My dream is to live long enough to see an end to this incarceration and torture, and perhaps even get home to my family, if they still exist. There doesn't seem to be any hope of escape. The camp is too cleverly constructed for that. In fact, in some inmates, there seems to be almost a sense of resignation and acceptance of their tragic existence. I believe they call that Stockholm Syndrome. Generally, our captors do not engage us in conversation or ask us anything. They usually just walk by as if we don't exist. When we move, they don't seem to understand what we are saying. I suspect they would at least try to communicate with us if we were human beings rather than cows. But today, uncharacteristically, one of my captors stopped at my cage to chat with me. He was one of the youngest of the men and sounded sensitive and caring, as strange as that may seem. But what he said really confused me. He mentioned that he doesn't eat meat and that he doesn't agree with the use of animals for food. I really didn't understand what he meant by that. After all, what is meat? A noble death. The end has got to be close now. My end. The end of a life. I still had hope not that long ago, but beaten down, tortured, abused, and humiliated, not anymore. I lie here in the dark and can only wonder what I have done to deserve this cruelty, and wonder what comes next. This makeshift graveyard is so cold. By the few dim lights, I can see the hundreds, maybe thousands of others, just like me. More are brought and dumped here every day. We cling to life with whatever little bits of energy we have left. 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, I've lost track of the days. My life was relatively normal. Yes, it was culling season, that dreaded time that comes every year when the days grow ever shorter and cold weather sets in. So I was somewhat worried, I confess. But I had survived so many seasons now that I was one of the biggest left, maybe even too big to be chosen. The people who came, the choosers, almost always favored the fairest ones, those of a certain age, about 12 to 15. I was 19 and far from fair. In fact, I was deformed. An accident when I was 7 had left an ugly scar, a bald and mangled patch too prominent to hide. Over the years, others had made fun of me with horrible names and mocking chants. It didn't help that back then I was also one of the smallest of those my age. The few elders left in our homestead tried to assure me that my size was normal, telling me that my kind simply grew slower and would catch up in time, that even my scars would fade. So much so that eventually no one would even notice. I never completely believed them, even though I wanted to. Elders like to fib, to try to make the young feel better. or alternately to scare them into behaving with their wild stories about the great harvester or the horrors of the burning winds. I guess I'm about to find out if any of those childhood tales are true. Even if my captors don't put an end to me soon, I know I can't last much longer, malnourished and exposed to the elements as I have been. Will the great harvester actually come for me to judge my life? I survived a glimpse of the burning winds, if only barely. Will I see them again at the end, in their full wrath? I try to suppress such horrible thoughts, but can't for long. Just the cold itself is almost unbearable now. And to think, up until a few weeks ago, I had never known what true cold really felt like. My whole life, or at least as far back as I could remember, I had lived on the farm. Broad fields surrounded by beautiful rolling hills with streams of the clearest water. It was all I had ever known, my home. If not for the culling, it would have been paradise. This year's choosers had already been coming for a few days, but their assessment of me so far had done nothing but reassure my beliefs. Most discounted me on size alone, with barely a glance. But others, likely those few who did seek a larger specimen, would be excited at first. They would often come up on my good side, maybe wondering how such a tall and rugged choice was still available, only to be disappointed after a closer look. During the culling, my scar was my salvation. In my youth, I had always wished that I could hide it, but now I wanted to turn my deformed side toward everyone who passed by, shove it in their faces, and dare them to pick me. "Look at the freak," I would have shouted if I had been able. "Take me. I dare you." With each new day, my confidence that I would live to see another year on the farm grew, until they showed up. There was nothing particularly special about them. The four of them talked among themselves as they walked among the rows, or at least three of them did. The smallest ran about wildly playing in the new fallen snow, ignoring the shouts of the others directed toward him. I could not understand their language, and could only guess at their intentions by their expressions and gestures. The tallest of them walked past with a typical shrug and roll of his eyes when he spotted the bare area so prominent on my backside, but the woman walking next to him surprisingly stopped and lingered. The man turned back. These two stood beside me, not angrily arguing, but obviously in disagreement. Their gesturing and so blatantly pointing out my imperfections was rather embarrassing. So since I could not turn away, I shifted my attention to the fourth member of the group, a younger woman. She had taken over the group's attempts to curb the smallest one's rowdiness, and like myself, seemed inclined to ignore the couple's discussion. For some reason, I felt a strange kinship with her, though we had nothing in common except perhaps that we were of a similar age. Distracted as I was, the cold bite of sharpened steel teeth slicing into me came as a complete surprise. I would have screamed aloud in pain and defiance if I had a mouth, but a voice is not an ability of mine. If I had either arms or legs, the tools of mobility, I would have fought back. Unable to protect myself, the sawing continued, cutting straight through the heart of me from one side to the other. Toppling to the ground, the view I had known for my entire life shifted dramatically in a sickening lurch, twisting sideways as I fell and landed in the snow. Cut in half, savagely severed from my underground parts, I truly felt the cold for the first time in my life. It started at the raw, fresh amputation wound in my trunk, shooting up my nearly 9 foot of height, flowing through every branch and needle. Instinctively, I reached out for the subterranean warmth of the soil, only to find more cold and frigid air in its place. Brutally exposed to the elements like never before, I was dragged helplessly through the snow. They hauled me toward the barn, the one that I had looked at in the distance day after day since I had grown tall enough to peek over the edge of the hillside. The familiar faces of the farming family waiting there briefly gave me hope that I could still be rescued. But they seemed friendly with the tormentors who were stealing me away, even helping them to throw me on top of their curious wagon and lash me down. Riding atop the wagon, we moved slowly away, the only home I had ever known receding behind me. But this was just the beginning of my ordeal. I was taken to their strange shelter and propped up in a corner in some bizarre mock replanting. Over the next several weeks, I was subjected to all manner of humiliation. I was bound with both lighted and glittery cords, had objects of all shapes and sizes hung from my branches, and even made to wear a silly sculpted version of a tiny woman with wings on top of me. I was starved, dehydrated, and deprived of sunlight. My only small consolation was that, inside their shelter, I was able to stay warm. Along with the abuse, the group made me the focal point in odd rituals. They liked to sit in the room with me, either staring vacantly into the lights wrapped around my torso, or watching a slender lighted box on the wall showing pictures of other people and places. And each day, boxes of all shapes and sizes, wrapped in colorful designs, were placed beneath me until they were stacked so high that they crowded against my lower branches. One evening, when only the two eldest of the group were there, they laid on the floor beside me, stripped off their outer coverings, and proceeded to wrestle and rub against one another for some unknown purpose. After the initial humiliation of being bound and adorned, I was little more than a silent witness to the weeks of bizarre events at the shelter. They all seemed to culminate one morning when, with all the members present, the boxes were torn open and their contents examined. Each member had a stack they processed, then stacked up whatever had been inside before hauling it away. They all seemed to take great pleasure in this particular exercise. After the day of the box openings, interest in me faded. The lights wrapped around me were turned off that night and not turned back on the following morning or the next. No one sat gazing dreamily at me or laid beneath my branches, and no new boxes were set underneath. For nearly a week, I stood in the corner, ignored. Then one evening, for no apparent reason, I was noticed again. The woman turned on my lights, turned off all the other lights in the room, and she and the man sat across from me. They talked for hours, occasionally looking my way and drinking from a couple bottles until both had fallen asleep. I should have been worried that this renewed interest in me could bring with it new hardships, but I didn't have the will to care. Cut off from the earth, I was hungry, and I was so dry. The woman had thought to give me water once, but only once. That had been weeks ago. My needles had started to turn brown and become brittle. Some of the lights binding me were different than the others, and they gave off more heat. This had felt rather good weeks ago, but now they were becoming uncomfortably warm, almost hot. One spot in particular bothered me. Uncomfortable quickly rose to painful, and the small spot began to spread larger and larger. A new light began to flicker in dancing orange flares among my branches, emitting willowy black puffs at its edges. I recognized the description of the black wisps called smoke and the yellow-orange flashes of light known as fire. Great harvester. It was the burning winds, that fearsome force that engulfed entire mountainsides in searing flame, consuming whole populations of pines. But this was how they started, we were taught. A small flame now, it would grow, and grow quickly. But what could I do? The pain intensified. Nothing in life had prepared me for this. The injury from my youth, no comparison to the agony I felt now. The man and woman slept on. I did not know if their kind could do anything to combat the burning winds, but they were animals, able to move and react, do things that immobile life like me couldn't, so it might be possible. But how to wake them? Never had I wished so much to have a true voice. Desperately, I yearned to scream into the night, to sound the alarm. As my branches burned and the destruction spread, the heat became excruciating. The walls and ceiling of the shelter started to blacken around me. I tried in vain to scream, to cry out at both the pain and injustice of it all. Flames lashed at the winged figure that sat atop my highest point. As she melted and fell, from somewhere near the very top of me, a wailing siren shriek suddenly burst forth, piercing the night and demanding attention. The man and woman both awoke quickly with the blaring noise, jumping up to action or escape. I didn't know which. The undulating noise persisted. The man and woman had been asleep. There were no signs of the other two, and I could find no other source for it. Could it be? Was it possible that this noise was coming from me? The man returned carrying a red can, stood back, and sprayed a dense cloud at the flames. The cloud was cold and smelled odd. To my amazement, it quenched most of the burning winds. The woman soon reappeared with a bucket of water, ran right up to me, coughing and sputtering, but splashing or pouring water on any bits of fire that remained or tried to rekindle. If this alarming wail was indeed coming from me, I couldn't stop. I didn't know how it had started, and now I couldn't stop it. The excitement was dying out with the burning winds, but the wailing remained. Wounded, coated in residue from the cloud, I was so exhausted that at first I didn't see the young woman coming at me, brandishing a long stick. She swung it back and forth, beating at my top branch, but missing and striking the ceiling of their shelter. Whether her actions sufficiently scared me, or I simply ran out of energy, after a few moments of her flailing, the screaming finally stopped. In the dark and quiet that followed, they huddled together, staring at me. Their actions had successfully beaten back the burning winds, but without the warning alarm, would they have come too late? Had I played a part in the response? If so, would they recognize my contribution and maybe take pity on me? They left slowly. I spent the night wondering. It was a somber group the next day who stripped me bare. Most everything that had hung from my branches was tossed carelessly into a single tall drum. Very few items were packed back in their original smaller containers. I was in a truly sorry state. Nearly half my branches were gone, burned away from my side. I was blackened and charred, the little moisture that had remained in me driven out by the heat. Once the remains of the bindings had been removed, the man wrapped a large piece of cloth about me, pulled me down, and roughly shoved me back out into the cold. Outside, he dragged me a good distance away from the shelter, as if to banish me from sight. I could only guess that since the burning winds had started with me, they were blaming me for the damage. I wanted to tell him the truth, but didn't try to speak again. Even if I had been able to speak, I knew that he wouldn't be able to understand, just as I heard them speak many times, but had no idea what they were saying. He left me there and sulked away, not saying a word to me either. 2 men in a large wagon picked me up and brought me here, along with so many others. I thought at first that this was a punishment for what had happened, but now I believe that this place would have been my destiny anyway. We lay in piles upon the stony ground, unable to even feel the comfort of a bit of soil beneath us. In the 2 days I have been here, I have seen entire piles hauled to the far end of the yard. A terrible noise comes from there. The sun is up now, and the tractor-like machine that carries us away is coming for me. It lifts me up with a stack of my kinfolk and moves us toward the dreadful noise. As we approach, I can see men standing next to a large machine. I watch in horror as a man lifts a noble fur such as me, but still green and full and perfectly shaped. No matter, he feeds the poor tree into the machine, its grinding noises dropping just a fraction as if it might choke. But no, from its other end, it spits chips out into an ever-growing pile, our final resting place, though it hardly qualifies as restful. I am dumped next to the men, and before I even have time to panic, I am grabbed and carried forward. I can see into the machine now, see the spinning and glistening teeth that will be my demise. I look away in terror, but then we stop. When I dare look again, I see another man standing next to the machine, shaking his head and pointing back over his head. The men holding me start walking in the direction the other has pointed. I don't know what is happening, as I am hauled past all the other fallen trees awaiting their fate, carried to the very edge of the yard. I am cast down a hillside into a ravine. I land and slide clumsily the last few feet to the bottom, where a small creek flows through weeds and fallen leaves. There is very little snow here, but what there is on the sloped hill is pure and white. I can still hear the machinery grinding away above me, but the sound is muffled and faint, almost in another world. Because I have been transported out of the hell that was my life since being stolen from the farm, back to a world that I can understand. I am shocked, injured, as close to death as is possible, half burned away with no hope of recovering. But I have been released. Has all this suffering brought me to this place? Am I to be allowed to die a dignified, honorable death? Have I earned the right to lie upon the earth like one of the great sentinels of the forest, those that grow hundreds of feet and live hundreds of years before they finally fall to the forest floor and slowly pass back into it, until finally, just a brittle husk remains, a home for some small creatures, or sustenance for future generations. If such a restful end is to be mine, then I can be at peace with that. A noble end, scratchy. Hold on, the line went a bit scratchy. Sandy, you're still there? Hi, Sandy. As I was saying, I think we have rats in the house. The night before last we were in bed and some god-awful noise woke me up. And no, it wasn't Ian snoring. You do grow accustomed to such things over 50 years of marriage, believe it or not. No, it was a scratching sound coming from the skirting behind the headboard. So I give Ian a good shove. No luck there. The man would have slept through Pompeii without so much as a twitch, let me tell you. Although, I don't imagine he can be sleeping all that well. That rash is back. I told you about his rash, didn't I? I keep telling him, stop scratching it. But will he listen? Anyway, at first I thought it was the pipes, you know. I swear the water system in this house hasn't been replaced since the Romans. I've told Ian, told him 1,000 times. Ian, I say, we have to get the pipes fixed. One of these days they'll burst, and it'll be me. You and the cats floating around the house on the bloody sofa like it's Noah's Ark. So I get off the bed, and I stoop to listen, and immediately I can tell it isn't the pipes at all. It's quite distinct. The sound of rummaging against the wood like little claws, burrowing. Rats do have claws, don't they? And the thing is, last night I heard the same sound, but this time it was coming from behind the cabinet. You know, the big one. the one with Ian's old tennis trophies, and I didn't even bother trying to wake the lug up this time. No, I jump out of bed, and I pull out the cabinet, and lo and behold, droppings all over the carpet. Not only that, but the same irritating sound started at the other end of the room by the bed again, and not 10 minutes later, in the wall by the phone right where I'm sitting now. Oh, I do hope they aren't chewing through the telephone wires. Aren't telephone wires rat-resistant? I'd hate it if I couldn't talk to you, Sandy. Could that be why the line is scratchy? Speaking of scratchy, I woke up this morning and my scalp was itching all over. Good job Ian's asleep, because I've been telling him not to scratch. And here I am scratching so hard my hair's falling out like it's bloody Chernobyl. I wonder if the cats have fleas, but they've never had them before. Oh, I'm so stupid. Of course, it must be the rats carrying the fleas. There are at least 10 of them now, all rummaging around, picking at the plaster, the persistent little buggers. I swear if Ian wasn't here and they all broke through at once, I'd have to call the police. For the life of me, I wouldn't know what the hell to do. I've cleaned the bedroom though, and, oh, by the way, I bought some of those new metal scourers. You know the ones? Everyone said how good they are. I've been all around the tops and the skirting boards with them, one in each hand like a bloody Dalek. Exterminate! Exterminate! They do the job though. My goodness, the bedroom has never been so spotless. You simply must try them. Sandy, you don't think they'd work on fleas, do you? I'm starting to feel them on my arms and legs as well as in my hair. I hope they don't aggravate Ian's rash. It's already spread up his neck and over his face. I'm looking at him now, the poor little bugger. He hasn't scratched in a while though, bless his soul. A fighter, aren't you, Ian? Ian? He could sleep through Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That man could. Hold on. Goodness, can you hear that? There must be 20 of them now. How do they multiply so quickly? Go away. I don't have any cheese. My husband can't eat cheese. The willful little buggers. Any more, and they'll have the telephone wires, I'm sure of it. If the line goes dead, I'm sorry, love. I'll pop in that phone booth near the pharmacy on Wednesday when I go to get Ian's prescriptions. He's on so many pills now, he rattles when he walks. Not that he walks much. The lug. Let's go for a walk, Ian, I say. But will he listen? Let's get you out of the house, Ian. It'll be good for you. No luck there, Sandy. Let me tell you. Oh, speaking of luck, did you manage to get hold of that exterminator that Ian recommended? You didn't? Ian. Ian! Sandy says the telephone number we gave her for the exterminator is disconnected. It's a bloody shame, Sandy. So, I guess the rats are still there, scratching, burrowing into the woodwork, crawling all around the walls, are they? I bet you can't even sleep of a night, can you? Poor thing. How awfully cruel. How many did you say? 50 now? Jesus, they're multiplying. That's practically the Black Death. What does your husband have to say about all this, Sandy? Surely he... Hang on a second, love. Don't go anywhere. Oh, those new metal scourers do work on fleas. Oh, ooh, that's the ticket. I must call the cats in. They'll be right as rain in no time. Dalek, exterminate, exterminate. Sandy, you're still there? Your husband must have something to say about all this. Ian! Ian! The rats are going to get through and Sandy doesn't know what the hell to do. Ian! Wake up, Ian! I'm so sorry, Sandy. The rash has spread all over, bless his soul. Sandy, hello? Hello? Oh no, the line's gone all scratchy. They must have got to the telephone wires. You hear that, Ian? I said they must have got to the telephone wires. Ian, I love you, darling. But goodness, you could sleep through hell itself, you could. Bloody lug. Who sleeps 3 days and 3 nights without so much as a twitch? I know what you need. How about a record? Okay, what do we have here? Aha. Glenn Miller. Perfect. Isn't it scratchy compared to the newer ones? But all the best ones are scratchy, aren't they? Look, darling, I'm dancing. La la, la la la. Can you see me dancing just like I used to? Look at me go. I'm 19 again. Oh, don't mind all the blood. It's only flea's blood. I'll clean it off later with my new scourers. Why don't you get up and dance with me? La la, la la la. Come on, Ian. Ian, wake up. Please wake up. Please wake up. They'll scratch their way in, Ian. They'll get through the walls if you don't wake up. The next step. Tristan stirred the sickly green tea in his mug, watching the bag bob up and down in murky suspension. He took a sip, cringed, and grunted in disgust. Far from being satisfying, he thought it tasted like wet grass and regret. He sighed and left the break room, entering the office corridor and pressing the elevator button with the same tired resignation he'd applied to his 3rd cup that morning. The mirrored elevator doors reflected a man worn thin, tired eyes, and a mouth set in a permanent downturn. He tried not to look at the strands of premature gray creeping over his ears. He took another sip of his matcha, forcing himself to swallow, trying not to think of how closely the drink resembled something he once scraped off the wheels of his lawnmower. Sighing heavily, Tristan glanced at his watch. He'd had back-to-back meetings all morning and hadn't felt needed for any of them, having so far only sat silently, taking notes and nodding as higher-ups talked in circles for an hour while ultimately saying nothing. Just a few more years, he reminded himself for the millionth time. A few more years proving yourself, then you'll be promoted to manager, then director, then you'll have made it. He took another sip of matcha and grimaced, struggling between forcing himself to swallow or spitting it out. It was a few moments before he noticed the old man who had come to stand beside him, waiting for the elevator. The old man looked sideways at Tristan and grinned. Just switched to tea, eh? Tristan forced himself to finally swallow and nodded. Yeah. The old man chuckled and said, "That look on your face, oof! You're a coffee guy, am I right?" Tristan examined the old man's face. He was ancient, likely pushing 90, but he wasn't a senior executive or even on the board. Tristan had memorized all their faces. Not really in the mood to make small talk with some random old guy, Tristan just nodded. "Thought so," the old man continued conversationally. "Let me guess, it wasn't your idea." Tristan frowned down at the tea in his hand and said, "My girlfriend suggested it." "Ah, another young pup, just doing as he's told." The old man chuckled again. "It's a shame you don't know how to think for yourself." Tristan bristled slightly at the remark, but didn't want to cause a scene at work by telling this guy off. So he forced himself to remain silent by drinking more matcha. The old man looked sideways at him and shook his head in disappointment. "Nothing? Pity. I hoped you had more spine than that." Tristan turned to face the man, his brows pressing together as he clenched a fist. "What's your problem?" Tristan demanded angrily. The old man laughed. "That's more like it. I knew there was still someone alive in there." The old man poked Tristan in the chest and laughed again. Tristan sneered and turned back to the elevator, wondering just what the hell was taking the damn thing so long. "You'll be waiting a long time if you just stand here," the old man said. "Feel free to take the stairs," Tristan snapped. "I don't mean the elevator, kid. the old man said, suddenly serious. Your goals, your dreams. I assume you have some. Let me tell you, no one ever got anywhere by just waiting. You gotta find it yourself. Yeah, well, no one's told me where else to look yet, so... Tristan replied coldly. And you're just waiting to be told, eh? Want the world to just hand you everything you want? That's the problem with you kids. You think your dreams just come true on their own? Tristan exhaled sharply, having had enough of being lectured by a stranger of no importance. He opened his mouth, ready to tell the old guy exactly what he thought. Then something was pressed into his chest. A folded sheet of paper, bronzed by time. Lucky for you, kid, the old man whispered conspiratorially. That's exactly how your world works today. What is this? Tristan asked suspiciously, his anger suddenly replaced with confusion. He carefully peeled back a corner of the folded paper. It looked like trash to him. He wondered if the old man was simply crazy. That, young blood, is a map, the old man said, pointing at the paper. A map to a priceless reward. I can tell by looking at you that you're not where you want to be in life. You follow that map, and your life will be forever changed. This is a joke, right? Tristan asked. You're giving me a treasure map? What is this, Uncharted? It's okay, young blood. The old man grinned. I didn't believe it first either, when a stranger handed me that thing. It took me 37 years to take it seriously. Wasted a lot of time. But if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have hesitated for a second. The intense sincerity with which the man spoke made Tristan uneasy, but at the same time he had felt a rush of excitement course through him. Even if the man was crazy, this was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him, so why not play along? Okay then, Tristan began, slowly unfolding the supposed map, deciding to humor the man for now. What's this reward? And why didn't you take it yourself? No, boy, I did take it, the old man insisted. Everyone gets their own reward. That map you're holding will guide you to a place that exists on no other map. From there, it will show you the way through the maze. Maze? Tristan repeated, still not sure if he should be taking this seriously or not. Yes, or a labyrinth more like. The map will lead you to the center, where you can claim your personal reward. But there's a condition to claim it. You have to pay it forward. Tristan stared down at the map in his hands. It was so fragile, worn thin, and creased with countless folds. It felt like it was going to crumble to dust in his hands. The old man turned and began walking away, just as the elevator dinged to announce its arrival. What you do next is up to you, but take some free advice. Don't waste half your life wondering about it. Over the following days, Tristan kept telling himself the old man was crazy. A treasure map? Ridiculous. But a part of him was intrigued, even more so when he asked around the office for the old man, and no one seemed to have ever seen him. He couldn't really explain why he decided to listen to the old man in the end, but Tristan left his home and began his search. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He took all the vacation days he had, then took off. After weeks of travel, all doubts about the map vanished as he found the place it led to. Tristan stood in a forgotten valley as the sun began to fall behind the horizon, looking in awe at the towering dark walls before him. They stretched infinitely to the left and right of where he stood, fading into the dwindling light in the distance and even stretching into the darkening sky. An archway towered over Tristan, a gaping mouth that marked the entrance to this place. Tristan almost expected lightning to split the sky. How could this monolith go undiscovered? Who had built it and why? These questions and countless more swirled around Tristan's mind like a hurricane, but they didn't matter. Not when he was this close. He had doubted that this whole adventure would lead to anything, but there was no denying it now. Tristan turned the map over in his hands, searching the back and the corners for what to do next. But there was nothing. The old man had told him the map would also guide him to the center of the labyrinth, but Tristan saw nothing that would help him the rest of the way. "Find me!" a voice suddenly whispered in the wind. Tristan jumped so much he nearly tore the map in half. He turned on the spot and searched for whoever had spoken, but he was in an empty field. There wasn't another person in sight. "Find me!" the voice whispered again, more urgently this time. Tristan turned again as he realized where the voice was coming from. It was speaking from within the labyrinth, a voice born on the wind that breathed out of the labyrinth's depths. Swallowing his nerves, Tristan took a hesitant step into the labyrinth. The world exhaled. Everything fell silent. Glancing over his shoulder, Tristan's face paled in an instant. The massive archway he had just stepped through had vanished. Instead, he was staring at a section of wall made of flat, dark stones that towered overhead, disappearing into the sky. Tristan stumbled forward and pressed his hand against the wall, pressing hard and breathing fast. "No, no, no, no," Tristan muttered in a panic as he felt all around the wall, looking for a way to get back out, but to no avail. After a few minutes of fruitless efforts, Tristan sat down in the dirt with his back against the wall, wondering what he should do now. He took several slow, deep breaths and managed to ease his sense of panic. As he calmed down, he began to examine the area around him. There were 3 paths, leading left, right, and directly ahead of him. Each one stretched into shadows. Tristan looked down at the useless map in his hands. To his shock, the map had changed. The instructions that had been there, that had led him to the labyrinth's entrance, had gone. Now there was a detailed drawing of the labyrinth itself. As Tristan watched, he saw that the illustration was still growing, the black lines spreading as though sketched by numerous invisible hands. As Tristan watched in awe, the black ink filled the page until the full labyrinth was drawn out, an intricate spider's web with a large empty square at its center. "Find me," the voice whispered once more. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Tristan swallowed hard as he tried to wrap his head around what was happening, then nodded once as if he just convinced himself to continue. The map clearly marked the center of the labyrinth, and Tristan noticed tiny dots following the path to his left. Without another moment of hesitation, Tristan turned and followed the directions, moving quickly, but cautiously, into the hidden depths. As Tristan followed the map's instructions, he heard the grinding of stones frequently, and could swear that whenever he looked at the map, it had changed slightly. There was no way of knowing what the other halls contained, but he could hear things lurking in darkness, stomping and slithering out of sight. He was certain they could hear him too, maybe even smell him. He didn't want to think about what would happen if he wandered down the wrong path. There came a point, after hours of wandering, where Tristan's path split into 2 corridors. The map clearly told him to go right, but Tristan felt a strong pull to go left instead. He had no idea what was down that path. He had no reason to veer off the safe route and pursue whatever was down that way, but the desire was almost overwhelming. He took a single step to the left, staring wistfully into the darkness. "There's something incredible down there," he thought. Whatever strange force was calling to him felt as familiar as going home after a long time away. It called to him, not in words, but in a way he could feel, like a thought he didn't remember having, a memory he'd never lived. But it was as dark as any other path, and utterly, deathly, silent. Despite this, Tristan could almost swear the air felt warmer down that path. Tristan took another step forward, dreaming of what wonders might be that way. "Find me," the voice whispered again, louder. Tristan snapped out of his dreamlike state. He turned and hurried along the path the map told him to go, already forgetting about the alluring alternative route that had called to him. Tristan lost track of how long he had been walking, though it felt like days. He rounded another bend and saw the infinitely large hall widen, revealing a bright silver light. Tristan gasped slightly as he realized this was the center of the labyrinth. He'd made it. Stumbling forward, Tristan fell to his knees on the grass before a raised platform that marked the center of the maze. Wiping the sweat from his eyes, Tristan glanced around, taking in his unremarkable surroundings. The only thing in the courtyard to see was the platform in front of him and the tall, shining object standing atop it. The light seemed to emanate from the object itself. It had an ornate frame made of silver, which twinkled enticingly. The frame held a simple, full-length mirror. Tristan stared up at the mirror with growing confusion. Was this it? This was the prize? "Find me," the voice whispered again suddenly, this time with much more insistence. Tristan flinched at the sound, as it was louder than ever before, and it sounded as if it came from the mirror. This time, now he was so close, Tristan recognized the voice. It was his own, speaking out of the mirror with urgency. The hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stood on end as Tristan stared with wide eyes at the mirror. The surface seemed to shimmer like a small pond, reflecting the light of a full moon. Tristan slowly moved closer, unblinking as he climbed onto the stone platform and stepped in front of the mirror. When he looked at his reflection, Tristan gasped. Where his reflection should have been, there was instead a strange yet familiar face. The old man from the office, who had encouraged Tristan on this adventure, stood in the mirror, looking out at Tristan with a hard and hungry gaze. "Hey, young blood, you found me," the old man said with a grin. He spoke with Tristan's voice. "What? How?" Tristan stammered. What's happening?" Tristan suddenly felt an ice-cold sensation grip his chest. He gasped from the shock of it and clutched a hand to his heart as he stumbled, almost falling to his knees. Glancing up, he saw the old man in the mirror begin to change. His white hair began to fill with color, becoming light brown and thick. The wrinkles on his face began to fade, and his skin became smooth. Tristan looked down at his hands, and his breath caught in his throat. His skin was shriveling before his eyes, the color draining fast, his fingers curling like brittle twigs. His veins pressed against thin and papery skin, his hands weak and trembling. "Help!" Tristan croaked, looking up at the old man in the mirror. But the old man didn't look old anymore. As Tristan stared, finally falling to his knees as his legs suddenly became too frail, he saw that the old man had become more youthful in only moments, becoming decades younger. What truly horrified Tristan, though, was the old man's new youthful face. It was his own. Tristan reached up and touched his face with trembling fingers. He felt his cheeks had hollowed out, and the skin around his neck and jawline seemed to hang loose from his bones. "Sorry, young blood," the man in the mirror said with Tristan's voice, now wearing Tristan's face. "You should have looked for yourself. The road not taken. Am I right?" Tristan felt a sudden invisible force begin to pull him towards the mirror. He screamed and clawed at the stone platform beneath him, trying desperately to find something to grab hold of. Tristan felt himself being dragged towards the mirror, and he screamed even louder, his eyes bulging out of his suddenly ancient face. He tried to crawl away, but the invisible force was too strong, and his now aged body too weak. Looking back, Tristan stared in horror as his feet touched the mirror, but instead of hitting glass, they simply vanished inside, as if he had sunk his feet into a dark ocean. Screaming even louder, Tristan thrashed and tried to pull himself free. He desperately tried to grab hold of something. He dug his fingers into any crack in the stones he could find. His fingernails snapped off as he was dragged with irresistible force, leaving thin trails of blood on the stone as he continued to claw for help. The man in the mirror, who now looked exactly like Tristan had, watched as Tristan slowly sank into the mirror. Tristan screamed the whole while, thrashing and clawing at the ground as first he sank into the mirror up to his knees, then his waist. Tristan still screamed and flailed when he was in up to his chest. Finally, the screaming stopped as Tristan's head vanished into the mirror, though one hand still protruded through the mirror, bloody and frail, searching wildly for something to grab onto, until even that had gone. Once the labyrinth's courtyard was silent once more, the man who had taken Tristan's visage pressed his hands on his side of the mirror and pushed, emerging easily from the mirror and stepping out into the cool air. He turned around and looked back into the mirror, admiring his reflection. With a smirk, the man smoothed out his new hair. He then looked down at the ground and saw the ancient map. With a grin, the man reached down and picked it up and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he turned and walked away, whistling casually as he vanished into the darkness. Summer 1992. 7th cup. The tea still works, even though it shifts and alters more than it should. My skin is tighter. I feel it around my chin and my collarbones, but it takes curious forms here and there, either too smooth or too sharp. The first time it happened, I barely noticed. I was blinded by relief, youth. I don't recognize my own reflection anymore. Now my patience wears thin where it once stretched long. My thoughts move too quickly, and my moods shift without warning. The hours of morning I used to cherish agitate me. It's like I'm trapped in time, not freed from it. Next time I'll use more leaves, just to make sure. The walls were covered with vines that followed the delicate pattern of bricks, seeping through gaps in the mortar and peeking inside like intruders. The house stood like a forgotten relic, with its green tapestry of tendrils creeping along the windowsills, curling around the hinges and swaying gently in the breeze. Some vines had grown so thick they formed a canopy over the sagging porch, casting shifting shadows on the creaking wooden floors. On the side, the chimney peeked out from the greenery, barely visible beneath the stubborn embrace of ivy. It was a house where nature had reclaimed its place, where the edges of time were blurred and cloudy. At the start of spring, the lilies flowered, and through the door left ajar you could see a bouquet placed carefully on the table. If you turned right, through the air that carried the earthy scents of the vines, you would find yourself in the parlor, where furniture sat like forgotten ghosts of another era. An armchair draped with quilt, a table so old its scratches looked like wrinkles, books with cracked spines and yellowed pages scattered across a shelf leaning slightly to one side. Moss clung to the edges of the fireplace. From here, you'd go through one of the two doors and end up in either the bedroom or the kitchen. The bed, centered in the middle of the room, had chipped paint coming off its iron frame. The blend of abandonment and charm that was the kitchen had mismatched jars of spices and dried herbs lined on shelves, and next to the sink, a cast iron kettle that rested on a stove, pulsing with a strange vitality. Its lid always seemed to breathe with soft metallic sighs, an ancient creature that seemed to know every secret whispered within the house. This altered slice of forest belonged entirely to Dorothy, an old lady whose only company was the house itself. Dorothy had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, a quiet but constant presence on the edge of the world. Her wiry frame, draped in shawls, moved slowly through the vine-covered walls, her hands always stained with the green of crushed herbs or brewed teas. Depending on who told the story, she might have been a herbalist, a healer, or even a witch. But for those who didn't like to indulge in the grasps of fiction, she was just a lonely old woman. The solace she found in nature helped her cope with the sadness and grief brought by age. Her thoughts often spiraled into the past, replaying moments from her youth that were long gone. The forest became her refuge, a place where her grief felt less sharp, where she could lose herself in the rustling of leaves overhead. It made her feel small in the most comforting sense, like a child again, cradled by something much larger than herself. Each time she was surrounded by the vibrant green and the hum of insects, she felt life and youth pumping through her veins. It made something inside her ache, deep and primal. It was as if she wanted to consume the forest whole, swallow its wildness and vitality, and fill the hollow place within her that grief had carved. In this warm embrace, she could almost forget all the heaviness she carried. Almost. April 23rd, 1952. First cup. I don't know what to expect. Perhaps a little more energy, an ease in my joints. I can see the plant standing outside my window, unfazed, as if it didn't just surrender something so life-changing to me. I don't expect miracles, because that would be foolish. If I wake up tomorrow and feel the way I did 10 years ago, even 5. Dorothy was at that age when even the slightest noise troubled her sleep. So when she heard the soft, almost rhythmic rustling, she got up immediately. It wasn't the sharp sound of wind, nor the familiar clattering of branches or leaves carried on the breeze. She stretched, her eyes still heavy with sleep, and gazed out through a gap in the curtains. There, growing just outside the window, was a plant nestled against the weathered stone wall, claiming the place as if it had always belonged. Except it didn't, the old woman thought. Its presence felt almost magical, with white blossoms that stood out like tiny stars, delicate and almost too perfect. Dorothy got her shawl and went outside to get a better look. The closer she stepped, the quicker her heart beat. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the leaves lightly. The plant had a quiet elegance and an earthy scent so familiar, she almost didn't notice the subtle, sweet fragrance that lingered in the breeze. The plant seemed to hum with life beneath her touch. It called to her. Was it a gift? An omen? As Dorothy pulled her hand away from the plant, she felt an odd, sudden shift. Something within her had been gently untangled. She looked down at her palm, and, instead of the familiar creases that had accumulated over the years, she saw skin so smooth, almost unmarked, as if just that part of her body had slipped away in time. The wrinkles, the evidence of age that had clung to her like a malady for so long, had vanished, replaced by the soft texture that she hadn't known in decades. In the stillness of night, Dorothy couldn't help but wonder, had the plant done more than just grow? Had it reached into her and drawn something out, something almost rotten? And if yes, could it do it again? A strange surge of impulse swept over her. She reached toward one of its thick, twisting branches, curled her fingers around it, and, with a sudden determination and strength, snapped it off. The leaves rustled in protest, but the plant itself made no other sound, no objection, no struggle. Start off by boiling the water, 4 cups over medium-high heat, which you then pour over about 1 tablespoon of leaves and steep to the desired strength before straining. The quantity of leaves influences the end result. Taste, smell, years turned back, so beware. Add sugar, if needed, and stir until completely dissolved. Pour into a cup and drink. She set the teapot on the table and rested her hands on the worn surface. The silence in the room seemed to stretch, as though the whole house was holding its breath. When she poured the hot liquid into her cup, the smell was sweet and inviting. Before lifting the cup to her lips, she let her gaze drift back to the smooth skin of her palm. It seemed impossible, and for a second, she thought it might all be a dream, a mirage created by her sleeping self. But there it was again, the freshness of youth staring back at her, all too real. As she took her first slow sip, the light of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a pale golden glow across the room. A ray of sunlight slipped past the table, past the jars with their faded labels covered in a layer of dust, and kissed the edge of the cup. After downing its contents, Dorothy couldn't help but smile. Years passed. The world shifted and reshaped itself. Time had forgiven nobody. It shed its old skin and kept emerging in a new form, always moving forward. Seasons marked their passing in the slow dance between life, death, and rebirth. The forest stirred from its slumber each spring, deepened its song in summer, caught its breath in autumn, and went to sleep at last, in winter. Outside Dorothy's house, the plant stood tall, its leaves shimmering in the sunlight, vibrant and green. It didn't wither in the cold or droop in the heat, and while the trees around it shed their leaves, the plant turned a deeper shade of green, as if to mock the cycle of decay that governed everything else. Something so human, so terrestrial, this idea of age, was never a threat to its well-being. Dorothy had witnessed these changes through both joy and sorrow. She was always there, a still point in a spinning universe. Each time she plucked a fresh leaf, she felt a rush of vitality fill her, the years peeling away from her skin. Her reflection showed a face far younger than she had any right to possess. 1 cup, 2 cups, 3, 20, 100. It was easy to lose track of time. The cycle of day and night became meaningless. Days and hours and minutes were nothing compared to the eternity locked behind her eyes. Instead, Dorothy would measure the passing of time by watching the plant diminish before her eyes, wondering how long it had left before turning into withered twigs. Would it one day simply stop growing altogether? Would she steal its essence until they both shrank, one no longer thriving at the other's expense? 132nd cup. I used to think highly of the plant, how time doesn't affect its leaves or flowers, but I'm not so sure anymore. The tea makes my stomach turn. I drink it anyway. What's the alternative? But every sip feels like a chore. I miss the sweet taste it once had. I don't even want to think about the possibility of it dying. Maybe it already is, and I just don't let myself see. The earth beneath Dorothy's feet was dry and cracked, reflecting nothing but decay. Around her, the world was lifeless. Even the birds, creatures that had once filled the mornings with their song, had long since vanished. Only silence remained. At the center of this desolation stood the plant, at least what was left of it, Its branches were brittle and twisted, no longer covered by the lush leaves that had once crowned it in green splendor. Dorothy knelt before it one last time, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the withered frame. She could feel it, the final breath of life, and she knew in the ache of her bones, in the faint lines that had begun to reappear on her hands yet again, that this would be all over at last. Time, it seemed, had finally caught up to her, and yet she couldn't resist taking this one more gift. Carefully, she plucked the final few leaves from the plant's skeletal frame, thin and fragile like paper soaked in water. In the kitchen, she lit the fire and set the battered kettle on the stove. The water boiled slowly, keeping the moment alive for just a while longer, this last ritual that she was unwilling to let go of. She dropped the leaves into the cup, watching as they unfurled, filling the air with the earthy scent tinged with a faint bitterness she couldn't recall. It smelled of death. She carried the cup back to the garden, standing among the ruins of her once vibrant wood, the plant motionless behind her. She hesitated for a moment before raising the cup to her lips and drinking slowly. The warmth spread through her body, but the feeling was different this time. Heavier, less vibrant. Her hands did not change. The lines on her face remained. The tea had nothing left to give. Behind her, the plant made a soft, cracking sound, and when she turned, she saw it collapse in on itself. Its branches curled inward. Its roots shrank, pulling away from the earth until there was nothing left but a blackened patch of soil. It was gone, completely gone. As Dorothy stood in the silent, dead garden, she felt a strange sensation stir within her chest, faint at first, and then growing stronger, deeper, spreading through her body like the vines on the house. When she clutched her arms, panic rising in her throat, she felt her skin softening, thinning, veins emerging beneath the surface like the ridges of a leaf. Her legs trembled, and she fell to her knees, the cracked earth beneath pressing into her bones. She couldn't rise back up no matter how hard she tried. She was shrinking, folding into herself, rooting into the soil as if she was being claimed by it. Swallowed. Her hair began to tangle and grow wild, sprouting into long, twisting vines that cascaded down her back and over her shoulders. She wanted to scream, but her words cut off, muffled by the sound of creaking wood emerging from her throat. It was as though the forest was taking back the very life she had drained from the plant over centuries. She had stolen, and now she would give. That was her last thought before her human form erased itself completely. Dorothy stands now, elegant and tall, her branches twisted upward toward the pale sky. She gave up on trying to regain her human beauty, but she mourns it still, while her leaves are swaying gently in the wind. From a distance, she appears flawless, a vibrant plant in contrast to the barren garden. As you get closer, though, you start to notice the rot and ruin on the tips of her leaves, how they curl inwards as if, in their attempt to grow, they lost their strength halfway. They whisper of a decay she cannot escape, no matter how deeply her roots have sunk into the soil. Rachel's Tower, Rachel's Tower. It's hard to imagine that we were all so young once, and how the world stretched out before us with seemingly endless possibilities. My friends and I managed to rent an old house in the now famous wine destination town of Napa, California, in the early 1970s. The town wasn't as famous then as it is now. The house was huge and out of place in the poor neighborhood of small, closely packed dwellings. 2 40-foot date palm trees perfectly framed the front of the house as well as the spacious covered porch on which we would often sit. The house itself was 2 stories high, wood shingled, had lots of windows, and a large number of small bedrooms upstairs. The house had been there a long time. There were rumors it had once been a house of ill repute sometime in the distant past, but no proof. The truth was that no one really knew why there were so many bedrooms, but it was great for us because the more people the house could accommodate, the cheaper the individual rent. A 3-story wood, shingled tower graced the backyard. At the top of the tower was a room that had 4 windows facing each direction. The structure could have been a windmill or pump house at one time, but the blades were long gone, and no one knew what it was currently used for as the landlords had the door padlocked. Many wondered what was in the tower. Sometimes people thought they saw someone in one of the windows at the top, but it was mostly when they were in altered states of mind, which was fairly often due to the frequent parties. So, the sightings weren't taken that seriously. And besides, the only access to the tower was a single door, which was locked from the outside. No one at the house had the key, and the landlords rarely came by since we always managed to pay the rent on time. During the year we managed to stay there before being evicted, there were some epic parties thrown. It was at one of these parties, about 2 months into our stay, that I first met Rachel. My initial encounter with her was undoubtedly influenced by the effects of beer and some killer weed I had just smoked, but nonetheless, she made a powerful impression on me. The first thing I noticed about her was her long, dark, curly hair, which stood in contrast to her almost porcelain skin. However, as she got closer, it was her unusual bluish-green eyes, which seemed to be her most dominant feature. I suddenly felt lost in some type of mental fog, as my whole world seemed to narrow down to the vision of her in front of me. Time came to a stop. I must have been staring at her for some time when a musical voice broke through my stoned stupor. "Charlie, you seem like you are in some kind of trance, or is it just good weed?" She laughed. I was shocked out of my reverie and snapped back to the reality of the party going on around me. On her face was an amused smile, but I still didn't know who she was. "Sorry for staring. You're right. It was powerful smoke." I chuckle. "Forgive me, but I don't think I know you. How do you know me?" "Oh, Charlie, everyone knows your name around here. You're quite the legend." "I am," was the only thing my drug-dulled mind could think of to say. I was kicking myself internally. "Of course you are. It seems your nicknames include Captain Cosmic and Space Cowboy, based on your love of getting stoned and then talking about strange and unusual topics. Isn't that right, Charlie?" She teases me. She's right about that, but I still didn't know who she was, and have never seen her before. "Well, mystery woman, you do know a few things about me, but I still don't know you, or your name. Are you new to town, or do you know someone here?" "Oh, I'm Rachel. And no, I'm not new to town. In fact, I've been here for a long, long time, longer than you can imagine, and I've got some stories to tell." I'm fascinated by this woman and don't know why, but I want to know more. "Rachel, I'm all ears. Let's grab a beer and find a quieter spot to talk." "Well, I picked you out of everyone here because of your reputation for liking the unusual. I hope you're ready for what I have to say, because I do believe in honesty, and I'm certainly out of the ordinary." She smiles. I assured her that I could handle whatever she wanted to say, even though I was already starting to wonder what I had gotten myself into. So, we find a spot in the backyard, by the tower, where it is quieter, since the main party is in the house. She turns down the beer I offered, but tells me the strangest story I had ever heard. I still have trouble wrapping my mind around it. Rachel started off by telling me she is a ghost, and I can't help but laugh. This had to be the most unusual woman I've ever met in my still young life. When my laughter calmed down, she smiled and continued. It seemed like other ghost stories I had heard before. Her large family were the first occupants of the house a little over 100 years ago, and she had died on the property and now found herself bound to it. I'm wondering if this is all she has, so I asked her the obvious question about why she is so solid if indeed she is a ghost. She told me that over the years, with a great deal of practice, she had learned how to project a shell, a manifestation of herself. This I also found a little amusing, until she asked me to feel her pulse. I find nothing in the wrist or neck, and her body, although not cold, is cooler than one would expect. My amusement was dying quickly, and suddenly, I started to feel some real fear. She saw it and held my hand while telling me she meant me no harm. She said she picked me to tell not only because I might be the most open to who she was, but also because she really liked me. It seemed that she could only maintain her projection for a limited time, and spent most of her existence in the spectral state people typically associate with ghosts. Therefore, she had observed a great deal about all who lived at the house, while being unseen herself. It seemed Rachel had concentrated her observations on me. She asked me if I needed or could handle proof positive of who she was. I wasn't sure, but with more reassurance from her, I agreed. So while still holding one of my hands, she smiled and slowly faded into nothingness. My heart rate jumped, and even though I thought I could handle it, the reality proved more difficult than imagined. The shell of what I had considered possible or impossible was suddenly ripped away. There was nothing where her hand had touched mine. Luckily, she reappeared very quickly and hugged me as I slowly calmed down with her seemingly solid body holding mine. When I had recovered and felt more myself, we continued to talk. I got a real feel for the loneliness and isolation she felt being stranded on the property perhaps forever. She didn't know or understand why her spirit couldn't leave. Rachel had only recently been able to perfect her manifestation enough to pass as a living human being. She finally felt it safe to appear at one of our parties, where it would be easy to just blend in without a lot of questions. For her, it felt amazing to finally be able to interact with people after so many years of being invisible to the world. Evidently, she knew a lot about all who lived in the house or visited on a regular basis. Rachel knew more about me than anyone else because she said she liked me from when I first stepped over the threshold of the house. The tower was her special place to be. At the top, she could look out and see what was going on at some distance from the house in all directions. It was the closest she could come to escaping the property and pretending she was part of the wider world. The fact that the landlords kept the door padlocked to prevent injury and liability guaranteed her privacy in the top room. After our first meeting, we would meet on a daily basis for as long as she could maintain her solid form, which would be a few hours at most. Rachel and I collaborated on a cover story to explain who she was, where she came from, what she did, and to answer any other questions that might be asked about her. Luckily, most of those who lived or partied in the house accepted her for who she appeared to be. She quickly became part of the culture of the house, and eventually, most considered her my girlfriend. As time went on, my feelings for her became more and more intense. Unbelievable, I was actually falling in love with a ghost. I tried to bring the outside world to her as much as I could with books, newspapers, music, pictures, and any other thing I could do. One time, I arranged for a beach party in the backyard on a warm summer day. I brought in some sand, beach chairs, large umbrellas, beach balls, and even a recording of waves crashing. We set up a volleyball court and a small above-ground plastic pool filled with cold water. People wore their swimsuits and we played beach volleyball, sat around in the small pool, and played surf music to enhance the mood. Rachel loved it and stayed as long as she could maintain her form. "Thanks, Charlie. This is great. It gives me just enough to imagine I'm at the beach again." She hugs me, and I almost feel she is really alive. "Well, you do look awfully hot in that bikini I got you. Not like a ghost at all. You know, just the thing to say to make a spook feel sexy." She teased and kissed me. My friends and roommates came to accept her, as one of us and she reveled in it. She seemed to have fallen as much in love with me as I had with her. Our intimacy was limited because of her situation, but that didn't seem to matter that much to either of us. There was something much deeper going on. It was so strange and surreal that I was the only one who knew what she really was, and I couldn't tell anyone else. Of course, all good things come to an end sooner or later. Given the way we partied and the previous warnings we had from our landlord and police, it was just a matter of time before we were kicked out of the house. Rachel and I knew it would happen, and we tried to get in as many good times and memories in before it did. Obviously, we were both very sad about parting, and our last day together was full of tears. We tried to formulate plans to meet up periodically after the eviction. The difficulty was, she couldn't leave the property, which would now be rented by others, and I couldn't come on the property without trespassing. After being evicted, I would walk by the property on pre-arranged days on the front sidewalk. If possible, and no one was looking, Rachel would appear as close to the sidewalk as she could, and we would talk. If we could get close enough to each other, we could kiss or hold hands for a short time. We did this for years, whenever it could safely be arranged. I got on with my life, went to college, married, got a teaching job, had children, and grew old. During this time, I still would meet her when I could. I was growing older and older, yet she remained eternally young. Several times I found excuses to walk my wife or kids by the house so Rachel could see them. She was never jealous and understood that there were things she couldn't give me, and I had to live my life. Rachel was always glad for me, while I secretly felt bad for her. She was bound to the property for eternity and denied any type of real life. As my life became more crowded and complicated due to work and other concerns, I visited less and less, but never stopped entirely. Eventually, my kids left the house, got married, and had jobs in other places. I saw them less and less, and phone calls or internet were not the same. My wife died, my health took a turn, and my time was limited. I became the old man I never thought I would become. Now, it is late night, and I have secretly arrived onto the property. I am sitting against the tower, and Rachel is by my side, holding my hand. I reach for the pills that will release me and swallow them down. Leaning my head against Rachel, I wait and hope the property will accept me.